Good afternoon. This is Dr. McDaniel at GYN Corner. I'm a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist in Midtown Manhattan, New York City, and I'm bringing all things health-related for women. Let's see. Today, I thought I would speak about prolapse, and that's because I used to get a lot of patients with uterine prolapse and anterior, what we call anterior-posterior prolapses due to the bladder or to the intestinal system. I used to get a lot of patients, like maybe 3 to 5 patients every day with prolapse issues. This was about 20 years ago, and in the last maybe 15 years or so, I don't see that many women with prolapse. So I saw a lady last week with prolapse and questions about prolapse, and I started thinking about why it's changed so much. So I'll go into that in another presentation, but prolapse is basically a hernia of the pelvic organs. So most people know a hernia is like if you have a abdominal or umbilical hernia, or they have a inguinal hernia, their intestines bulge through their abdominal wall. Well, there can be a hernia of the pelvic organs also, where the pelvic organs bulge or fall through the pelvic floor. So I'll divvy the presentation up into the anterior, mid, and the posterior sections of the pelvis. Today I'm just going to give a general overview. So prolapse is when the pelvic organs, be it the bladder, the uterus, or the intestines, when they start to fall or collapse or bulge through the openings of the pelvic floor. And the openings of the pelvic floor are the rectum, the vagina, and the urethra. So if you think of our pelvis as having a sling or a trampoline, where the muscles hold everything up into the pelvis, the pelvic organs are the bladder, the uterus with its associated cervix, and the intestines along the rectum. Those are all the organs that sit on the pelvic floor. We have holes in the pelvic floor to allow the bodily functions that are necessary from those pelvic organs. So urine flows through the first opening or hole in the pelvis, and that's the urethra. The uterus and the cervix allow babies or menstrual blood or issues to come out through the vagina. That's the second hole in the pelvic floor. And the last hole in the pelvic floor is for the rectum to allow feces for waste products. So those holes are also the weak points of the pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor is tightly closed everywhere except those holes. So any kind of increased abdominal pressure or force can allow things to fall through those weak points of the pelvic floor, and those are the urethra, the vagina, and the rectum. Now, if you think of the pelvic floor as being a sling or a trampoline, it has strength to hold all of those organs up. And that strength can be compromised through any kind of constant or frequent repetitive pressure activities. So anything that increases abdominal pressure will put force and strain on the pelvic floor. So a prolapse is when there's a herniation through one of those orifices, and that herniation or the prolapse is going to allow those organs to fall or to collapse through those orifices. So anything that can cause abdominal pressure, that's going to be frequent coughing. If someone has asthma or chronic pulmonary disorder like obstructive pulmonary disease, they'll have lots of coughing. You can also get people who cough a lot due to reflux. Stomach acids go up the wrong direction, up into the esophagus, and then they can go down into the windpipe or the trachea. That can cause frequent habitual coughing. Or someone with lots of allergies, environmental allergies, can have frequent coughing. Another increased area of force or pressure of the abdomen, which will put pressure on the pelvic floor, is going to be if someone's really overweight. So technically 30 pounds or more overweight will put increased pressure on the pelvic floor, especially if it's predominantly abdominal weight or abdominal fat. That puts pressure on the pelvic floor, pelvic muscles, and over time that causes stress. And I'll take that from you, Tamara. Oh, okay, thanks. Stress and strain on the pelvic floor muscles. So coughing's a frequent one. Abdominal weight gain or belly fat is a very common one. Obviously pregnancy. Pregnancy puts a lot of strain and pressure and weight on the belly muscles and on the pelvic floor muscles because of the heavy gravid uterus or pregnant uterus. And pregnancy also increases the stress and strain because if you have a normal vaginal delivery, that puts a lot of stress and pressure on the pelvic floor with the pushing and with the baby's head as it comes out through the vaginal opening. That stretches and distorts and puts a lot of stress and strain on the pelvic floor muscles. Another potential source of increased abdominal stress and strain is weightlifting. If you have female weightlifters or bodybuilders, that puts a lot of stress and strain with the increased weight that they're lifting up. Or even if you're not a bodybuilder or a weightlifter, if you're doing any kind of daily work activity that involves lifting heavy objects, and heavy is considered 25 pounds or more, repetitive activities where maybe you work for a shipping company or you work in a construction site, then that's constant, frequent, heavy lifting. Or maybe you're an at-home mom and you're doing a lot of house cleaning activities or lifting toddlers, which can be more than 25-30 pounds. You're lifting them up, carrying them around, or maybe cleaning, a lot of pulling or pushing sofas around or pushing furniture around to clean behind them or under them. So any kind of activity that involves heavy lifting, frequent pushing or pulling, that will cause strain or stress of the abdominal wall muscles. It will also put that force or pressure to the pelvic floor, the pelvic muscles. And stress, strain, and pressure on the pelvic muscles will increase the force that's put on those pelvic muscles, and they will be compromised, and they can allow for weakening and damage of the pelvic muscles, which in turn will allow for weakening of the support to the pelvic organs and allow those pelvic organs to start to prolapse or to fall through one or more of those three orifices in the pelvic floor. Since the pelvic floor acts like a sling or a trampoline, it has a degree of strength that when there's pressure, it can push back and bounce back and prevent that compromise. But over time, that strength of the pelvic floor muscle will be compromised, and over time and with enough stress, strain, pressure activities, it will start to buckle and weaken under those activities and allow for herniation of pelvic organs. So that's going to be the first presentation. It's just the definition of prolapse where it comes to the pelvic organs and the different sources or etiologies of that weakening or prolapse. I'll be back tomorrow, Tuesday, August 20th, and I'll go into the signs and the symptoms of the prolapse and ultimately the diagnosis and management. Thank you for joining me here at GYN Corner on the Facebook live stream. This is Dr. McDaniel, and please like, subscribe, and follow because you'll get a heads up on when the presentations are coming. Please check out the YouTube channel and our podcast platforms because everything is very nicely organized and categorized on those platforms. We're on 8 different podcast platforms, Anchor, Spotify, Apple iTunes, and the Google Podcasts are the most popular ones. And then on the YouTube, it's also GYN Corner. Thanks a lot for joining me. This has been a presentation or an introduction on the presentation for prolapse. See you tomorrow. Thank you. Have a great rest of your Monday. Bye.